The iFlight AOS5 is a really, really good bind and fly. I've been flying this one for about 4 or 5 months since I reviewed it. And there's things you learn about a quadcopter in 4 or 5 months of flying it that you maybe didn't know when you first reviewed it. In fact, I'm going to tell you today how I finally killed it. And we're going to go through the process of fixing all the stuff that I've found that I kind of didn't like. I'm Joshua Bardwell. You're going to learn something today. The thing that killed this quadcopter is that the ground pad on the ESC has lifted. See it wiggling there? And that means when I plug in a battery, I'm not going to do it because it's not very safe. It either just doesn't make contact, the whole thing doesn't power up. Basically, the ESC is toast. And it's a shame because this is fundamentally a preventable problem. What happened was that I had a battery mounted as shown and plugged in. And when I crashed, the battery slid forward. And this is not the first time that this has happened. The battery has slid and come loose many times before, and I just didn't do anything about it except to try to cinch these battery straps down extra tight. Eventually, it slid forward to the point where it just pulled and tugged on this wire and ripped it. And now my freaking, what is it? It's like a $60, $65 ESC or something is dead for no freaking reason. So what could have been done to fix this? That's the part that I'm going to make you wait till the end of the video for. But in the meantime, let's pull this guy off and let's replace the hardware. Fortunately, the AOS5 is not too difficult to work on. We'll take out the screws from the top plate and lift it off, and we'll have full access to everything we need. And I guess the smart thing to do would be to buy another 20mm ESC and reuse this flight controller, which is perfectly good, instead of throwing out the flight controller and using a 30mm ESC and flight controller that I already own, right? That's the smart thing to do. But I wanted to fix it today. While I'm waiting for the new ESC to come in the mail, let's take a look at the other things that I kind of don't like about the frame. I told you about some of these during the review, and it's nice to go back and find out that I still feel that way and I was right. As always, I hate these plastic wire covers that iFlight uses on their bind and flies. They shatter, and then they become sharp and jagged when they shatter, and then they cut the wires. I have had more motor wires cut by these jagged plastic motor protectors than I ever have cut by a prop. In fact, I kind of can't remember the last time a prop actually cut my motor wires. I will be taking these last two off and replacing them with fabric tape. The tape that I like to use is this stuff. It is called wire loom tape or wire harness tape, and it is really nice, heavy fabric. It is a little bit flexible. It provides a little bit of abrasion resistance. It's just fantastic, and it is what I've been using for my motor wires on my arms for quite a while now. My preferred way of removing it is to get up under it with a flat blade screwdriver and just carefully pry it away. This is puts the least amount of stress on the motor wires themselves, I believe, and gets it off with the minimum risk of damage. I'm going to be very careful not to yank or tug the motor wires while I'm pulling it off. If it comes loose all of a sudden, you wouldn't want to do that. Although the fact that I've already destroyed the ESC sort of mitigates that concern a little bit. I always try to be really careful not to accidentally cut the motor wires while doing this, because that would be sad. Although I would once again blame stupid plastic. Anything that would have cut the motor wires also breaks this stupid plastic. Then the plastic itself is a hazard. I'm very impressed with the durability of this Express LRS antenna. This is the iFlight Express LRS receiver. A lot of times these antennas will be made with braided wire or stranded wire, if you will, and as soon as they start taking a couple whacks, they fall apart. I can't tell for sure, but this feels like it's actually solid wire, and you can see it's been beat to hell, and I've just kind of bent it back into shape, and it's really hanging in there. This is the most durable Express LRS antenna that I have ever had on a quadcopter. Another thing I complained about in the original review that hasn't been as much of a problem as I thought it would be is these protectors for the end of the arms. The reason that they're a problem, I mean, it's good because a lot of times you end up throwing out an arm just because you beat up the ends and the arm is actually perfectly fine. So it's great to protect the ends of the arms, but the problem is that the screws holding the motor on have to go through this TPU. The TPU is compressible, and that means that you can never get the screws perfectly tight, because if you did screw the screws perfectly tight, they would just go down through the TPU. And you can see some of the screws are starting to pull through the TPU. So what do? There's not a lot of things you can do. You could design these arm protectors with like little metal sleeves on the inside. Nobody's going to do that. It's too much trouble. Personally, I think I'm just going to take them off. That doesn't mean I'm going to have to replace these screws, because I'll need shorter screws to avoid digging into the motor wires. If you did decide to keep them, I guess some washers could help. I could put some washers on here, and that would help them bind into the TPU without pulling through. The other thing I would consider changing is that I get a lot of situations where this will sort of bend back like this and then get clogged up with mud and not really go back into place. And it just doesn't feel real sort of high quality to just be sort of dangling there. Maybe these could be done with a little bit of an overhang here. So, well, I guess 3D printing them with that overhang would be a pain in the ass, because you'd need to have supports, and I don't know, maybe somebody else could figure out how to do that. But if they did sort of have a little pocket here that this toe could fit into, then they would be a lot more snug and protect a lot better, and then I might dislike them just a little bit less. Another problem that I've run into with this frame is that these screws do seem to tend to work loose, and screws will always work loose, especially if you don't Loctite them. I can't remember if I went back and Loctited these. I certainly talked about that I ought to, but then knowing me, I may not have actually done it. I'm constantly having to tighten them up, and they are working loose. Other than that, though, they've held on pretty well. I haven't really had any problems with durability, and as long as I double check these before I fly every few flights, every few days of flying, that is, then they haven't really been an issue. Okay, Joshua from the future here. I can't talk about the durability of this frame without acknowledging that there are plenty of people out there who feel the durability of this frame is not up to their standards. The arms break more than some people would prefer. I've seen pictures on the internet of delaminated carbon, especially those little oval spacers between the arms, and places where the countersunk screws cause the carbon to be too thin and to break. I think that how you feel about this depends a lot on how hard you want to hit your quadcopter before it breaks. This is not designed as a hardcore freestyle bando basher. I think if you fly in the kind of environments I fly in, that is mostly grass and dirt and trees, you're probably going to be happy with it. But if you absolutely want something that is less likely to break, you're going to need something bigger and heavier, and it's going to fly different. And that's just an engineering trade-off, not necessarily a flaw in the design. But it definitely is something that you need to be aware of. And to be fair, there are other frames in this weight class that don't have some of these issues. Enough said. Well, it's Joshua from the future here, and you're going to get to go to the future too, because the future is where I have the replacement ESC that we'll go ahead and put in this quad. We'll put it back together, and we'll see if we can figure out a better way to do this XT60. I don't know. Let's get this ESC in here first. Oh, and you can't access the stack screws from the underside without taking off the plate. Just gonna, there we go. Oh, do we need to take the camera off? That's, so lame, so lame. Alrighty, and she's clear. What a shame. What a waste. I mean, this is a perfectly good ESC. Well, I mean, not anymore, it's not, but it's functional in every way except that the XT60 ripped off. What a waste. No way around it, though. There is no way to repair damage this severe. It's just gone. It's a goner. All right, the motors are soldered up and the new ESC is in, and I gotta come up with the final answer for how to fix this XT60 problem. If I were not installing a new ESC from scratch, I think what I would probably do, it would just be coming up like through here, I think. I think I would just put a zip tie around here, right, around this little piece here, and that would take some of the slack out. But I don't think I'm gonna do that because I think it's gonna be better to have the XT60 coming out the side and zip tie it to a standoff. That's what I do on most of my personal builds. And the reason I like that better is that with the XT60 coming up out of the center here, it kind of stuffs up behind the GoPro if you've got a GoPro on, which I typically don't run this with a GoPro, but never mind that. It just pushes the battery back just a little bit, and it gives something to slam up against the GoPro since it's between the battery and the GoPro. But running it out the side, you don't have that problem. The downside to running it out the side is that it is closer to the props, but the AOS5 is pretty roomy with 5-inch props anyway, so I don't think that's really going to be an issue. So we're just going to take a look here. I'm just going to sort of, I don't want to, this is, it came with 12 gauge wire, this is 14 gauge. And so I'm going to try and keep this as short as possible because the smaller wire will have more resistance, but you can make up the difference just by using a shorter XT60. It actually makes almost no difference. I'll tell you more about that later in the video. So let's just get this like about here. Seems right. That's going to give me a little bit of slack to come up to the battery, but yeah, and then we'll just cut it to length. It's going to be minus, then plus. We're going to cut minus right about here-ish, and plus is going to be just a little longer because it has to go over here. So like right about here-ish, and we will strip and tin and solder those up and see how it goes back together. Alrighty, she's mostly back together, and I'm going to follow through with my plan to zip tie the XT60 to this standoff. This is a bigger zip tie than I would usually use, but I am out of my smaller zip ties, so there you go. When you do this, try to make sure that you're not putting any tension. Like, I actually will push it inward slightly. I don't know if you can see that, so that it's not under tension and pulling and just constantly stressing out that joint. We just want to have a little bit of slack there so that, you know, when the stack, you know, maybe it wiggles or jiggles or vibrates slightly so that it doesn't stress those pads anymore, at all. We'll just do that. It's a big ass zip tie, and we'll see how this works when we put the top plate back on. Hopefully works pretty well. Hopefully. I hope. That is gonna be just fine. Yeah. Now, before you rush to the comments and tell me that the AOS5 Evo has released with a custom 3D printed strain relief for the XT60 to help solve this exact problem. Before you rush to the comments to tell me that, I want you to know two things. Number one, I recorded this video before the AOS5 Evo came out. That just took me a long time to publish it. And number two, I still would probably do it the way that I've done it because I don't like the XT60 coming up here. It gets in the way of the GoPro and doesn't give you a lot of room on the top plate to have your battery. So personally, I still like it better coming out the side, but kudos to Chris Rosser and, well, just to Chris Rosser, I guess. Kudos to Chris Rosser for solving this issue. And you know what else I'm going to do? Oh, gosh, yes. We're going to get rid of this factory battery pad, and we're going to put some actual Grip on here. If you guys don't know what Grip is a super sticky battery pad made by Tommy Tabahia, God. And you may look at it and go, oh, well, what's unique about that? It's just it's polyurethane. But he tested a bunch of different sort of blends of polyurethane to get the right, look how sticky this is. So maybe a little hard for you to tell. It's just sticky enough and grippy enough that the battery doesn't slide out. Whereas these factory ones, they provide spacing and shock absorption, but they don't prevent sliding. There are aftermarket versions of it. For a while, he was the only one making it, but now lots of people make aftermarket versions of it. Here's some Flywoo stuff, but you want this grippy, sticky battery pad. I wish manufacturers just freaking included it, because honestly, the factory stuff is really just a total waste. I've put the Rotorite and the battery pads right next to each other. That surely won't cause any part of the fabric of the universe to explode. Earlier in the video, I was talking about the thickness of these XT60 wires, and I said that there was basically no difference in the performance of a 14 gauge wire versus a 12 gauge wire, which may have surprised you because obviously a 14 gauge wire has higher resistance than a 12 gauge, therefore obviously there must be more voltage drop, therefore obviously there must be a performance difference. But I can back up that claim, and I'm going to show you the video where I tested to back up that claim. I've got a card on screen and a link in the video description, and the short version is that yes, there's a little bit of a difference, but it's like, well, anyway, go watch the video if you think that there's a 14 gauge versus 12 gauge actually freaking matters. See you there.